Hi everybody, Jared Goff from Missio Scotland here with another We Are Mission podcast, and today I am delighted to be joined by Neil Roarty, who is the Outgoing Director of Religious Education in Paisley Diocese. Neil, thanks very much for joining us today.
No, pleasure, Jared.
So, for people who don't know who you are, can you tell us a wee bit about your background, where you're from, your schools, parishes, upbringing?
So born in the Gorbals, mid-50s, and at the age of 4, moved up to Castlemilk with, like, most of the Gorbals moved up to Castlemilk at that time. I was baptised in St Francis Church in Cumberland Street, a massive big church, sadly now handed over to the City Council, and then moved up to St Margaret Mary's. Schools was Dougray Terrace Roman Catholic Primary School. The head teacher refused to give it a saint's name because it was converted tenements that we were in. Our school was converted tenements, and she said she wasn't going to give it a saint's name until she got a proper building, and when she did, she called it St Julie's. So that was my school, and then went on to St Mungo's Academy up Townhead. So that's kind of a brief bit of my background.
And so, at school, what sort of things were you interested in?
I suppose at school, particularly secondary school, I was not into sciences and maths. They blighted many a weekend for me with maths and exercises and things like that. So I was more into, I became a history teacher, so I was into history, but also like languages like French, Latin even, and English. So those are the kind of things that I really enjoyed at school, were those kind of arts type of subjects.
And what did you have designs of being when you were young? What did you dream of being? Was it something different from what you became?
Probably not. Probably two possible goals. One was to be a priest, right? And the other was to be a teacher. And I probably think that was because of the people I'd encountered in my life. The priests in St Margaret Mary's in particular, who were really fantastic priests and did a lot with young people, or teachers I've encountered as well. It made a difference to me. So I think those were the two those are the two careers. I briefly flirted with being an architect, but that was mainly because of Lego, right? And when I realised you need to do things like maths and stuff like that, I thought, well, that one's away. So I stuck with the other possibilities, in particular being a teacher.
And you've mentioned there's some kind of priestly examples, and obviously good examples in a Catholic school as well. Yourself, did you say you would come from a typical traditional Catholic family?
Yeah, definitely. So Mass every Sunday. I mentioned that we moved up to Castlemilk, but every Saturday afternoon we went back to the Gorbals to visit my grandparents. But on the way along to my grandparents, we would stop in at St Francis Church every Saturday at 4 o'clock for confessions. And then after that, we would then go up to my grandparents, catch the last 20 minutes of Radio Scotland's commentary on whatever game was on, and spend the rest of the evening with my grandparents. So that was that. So again, it was, May devotions, the St Anthony's Divina, back to St Francis for a big event in the life of the parish was the May procession, which took place every year with all the first communicants, led by the St Francis Pike Band. It was looking back now, and it was almost like being in Naples with the crowds gathering the streets as the procession came through the streets. So it was big things like that were important and probably shaped my faith. When St Margaret Mary's, Father James Martin, he started the Corpus Christi procession around the grounds of St Margaret Mary's in Castlemilk. So they're big formative events that that faith was important to my family, and I suppose in school as well. I remember in Lent at Dougray Terrace Roman Catholic Primary School, you would go to Mass like 8:25 in St Margaret Mary's at Dougray Road, and then there'd be a lot of teachers there as well, and you'd walk along to the school when there'd be juice and whatever, a wee breakfast there for you. Again, that was a seminal moment in that whole business. It wasn't just my family, but you were getting example from teachers in schools and obviously the life of the parish as well. I suppose they helped to shape my faith and form me as a young Catholic.
Did you ever get that old question from the teachers on the Monday? What was the gospel on Sunday?
Yeah, I think it was a number of questions. What was the gospel about? What were the colour of the vestments? There were a variety of questions. I remember when I was an altar server, I was coming down from a Sunday night mass, and halfway down the road, there was this young boy stopped me, a bit older than me, who asked me, because he obviously hadn't been to mass, but had been sent out to go to mass, and he asked me what was the colour of the vestments and what was the gospel about. So yeah, so those were the questions that were there.
Yeah, you always hear that, and you always wonder if it's like a cliche that's kind of...
No, definitely. My wife, she grew up in Ayrshire, and again, the teacher would be asking who had been to mass, and would take a note of who had been to mass and who hadn't been to mass. And now in reflection, my wife thinks that was a shame for those children. It wasn't their fault that they hadn't been to mass.
Yeah.
It was their families that should have been taken to mass.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just to touch on, the Gorbals is obviously a very kind of historically a big Irish area.
Yeah.
So a big Catholic area as well. When you moved to Castlemilk, did you still feel that kind of same sense of, Irishness, Catholicism up when you were moved there with other families?
Yeah, it probably was, because just all around us were people who had moved up from the Gorbals. So, for instance, just round the corner, to me, was a family, the O'Donnell family, that lived the next story up in the same close in the Gorbals. So there was lots of still Catholics, still Donegal Catholics in the area, and so therefore that whole kind of ethos or culture was still very much alive. I suppose it was evident in being Celtic supporters and that, but also a lot of us going to Ireland for our holidays. That some of us would be going to Donegal, but myself, my mother's side was from County Monaghan, so that's where we went, and you were there for maybe 5-6 weeks of your summer holidays, out 3 miles out outside the nearest village, living in a farm and things like that. So that whole sense of Irishness and being Catholic definitely still continued, certainly, and I think that's still true. I'm now in Christ the King parish in the south of Glasgow, just a few hundred yards down from where I grew up in Castlemilk, and there's still a lot of Irish people there. And again, when Donegal's playing in All Ireland finals, you see a fair sprinkling of Donegal tops in the congregation at Mass. So yeah, I think there's still Christ the King, a very strong Irish Catholic vibe in the area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. You can certainly see Donegal jerseys around about this time of year, because they're usually at the business end of the championship. Yeah. In terms of like a saint or a scripture passage, are there any that kind of define or inspire your faith?
I suppose when I grew up, my confirmation name was St. Anthony. It was Anthony because he was a Franciscan saint. And again, it goes back to the ties with St. Francis Parish and the Gorbals, because although we had moved to St. Margaret Mary's in Castlemilk, we did go to confession every Saturday in St. Francis. There was the May procession, but also there was a big event in the life of the parish, of the Franciscan parish, with the St. Anthony's Novena, when it was on for like 9 nights, and led up to his feast day on the 13th of June. And the old St. Francis was a massive church, a beautiful church, and it would be mobbed every those 9 nights, and then the culmination was the blessing of the lilies, and my family would be down for that. So St. Anthony, and I suppose that was a big scene. But I suppose the scripture was maybe 2 parables. I think the parables are great sources in scripture. And there's 2 parables that really, I suppose, still speak to me. And it's the parable of the prodigal son. And I love that story, not just because of the really strong characters and narrative in that story, but also the whole question of that if you mess up, right, God is there to welcome you back. And not just he's like the father in the story. He goes out to meet the son. He's not waiting, for the sun to come and bended knee and to rehearse his lines. And I suppose the other parable that influences me is the parable of the Good Samaritan. Again, really strong characters in that. And I suppose that kind of speaks to me again because it's about, a stranger helping someone who wasn't of his kind of tribe, as it were, or of his faith, but who went the extra mile, looked after the person, tended his wounds, put him up and in, paid for it, but also went back to check up on him. And it reminded Pope Francis a few years ago said he wanted Catholic schools to be in schools, not hospitality inn or Premier Inn, but places of welcome and hospitality that would look after pupils, children, young people, and do their very best by them. And I suppose that again inspires me as well. That kind of mission to be, a welcoming school, a welcoming person, and not stick to your own boundaries or a narrow sense of who your neighbour is.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very much to me a parable that ties in with mission.
Yeah.
The mission of our faith and so on. In terms of you deciding to take up a career in education, you've obviously mentioned that teachers were a wee bit an influence. How big an influence were they, or was there something else that was a catalyst for you to take up that career?
Possibly a lack of imagination on my part, but I think there were certain teachers in primary school particularly, because you had the one teacher for the whole week, the whole year, and there were teachers who did take an interest in you. And one particular teacher was a Mrs. Mackey, and I had her in primary 3-4, made my first communion with her. But she did go out of her way to push you on, to support you, liaised well with my family, and gave me extra work, which I wasn't particularly overjoyed with at the time to get extra work. But she was really good, and she actually stayed as a member of the family. And as I went through secondary school, and I hated maths and science, but she had a son who was in upper secondary school, and if I was stuck with my maths and exercise, right, I could go down to him, and he could get me through the mysteries of algebra and things like that. And she was at my wedding as well. She maintained very good relationships with my mother, lived just across the road from us, so she was really good. But there were other teachers as well. I remember when the tenement school, as it was then, the tenement school in Castlemilk in Dugree Road was overflowing, right? And a couple of years we were not bussed down to empty rooms in Kings Park Primary School. And one lunchtime I was out kicking a ball. I wouldn't say I was playing football, but I was kicking a ball around the yard over my ankle, way to the Victoria Infirmary, stuck it on, and the comfort when I was getting the stick on was thinking, I'll be off school for a few weeks here. Right, this is worth the pain. But my teacher, right, arranged for another teacher who lived just across the road in Farm Drive to come and collect me every morning and take me to school. I was raging, right? But it showed the length that they were prepared to go to support you. Within that, I suppose also at secondary school, maybe no immediate standouts, but just a lot of kind of drip feed of really good teachers. Not just in the sense of the way they conveyed their subject, but also good teachers in the way they took an interest in pupils in their classes. Even teachers you only met at homework classes, they would take an interest in you and encourage you. So I suppose there was that kind of drip feed throughout secondary school of good teachers that kind of maybe planted that, encouraged that notion in my head to become a teacher.
Yeah, I think whenever I'm in schools and I stress the importance of teachers to the kids and things like that, you actually made a really good point there. It's almost like, especially maybe in primary school, it's almost like a maternal or a paternal relationship, within the school where, a fantastic teacher really, really does care about their kids, that's in their charge, and they kind of, in primary school, it feels like very cosy and very protected, and then you've got the maternal or paternal figure in a secondary school where they need to go give them a kind of, sometimes a wee bit of a shove in the right direction. It's maybe a wee bit more tough love, but it's strange how that kind of mimics the family unit, like a really good Catholic school and a good Catholic teacher can mimic that family unit.
Yeah.
Your own kind of career trajectory in the world of education. Tell us a bit about how that went.
So I did history and English at university, went to Notre Dame College of Education, as it was in those days, and qualified to be a history and English teacher. But I got a job in John Bosco Secondary, back in the Gorbals where I'd been born, right? And in fact, a number of cousins or second cousins actually had the misfortune to come through my class in those years, and to meet my father's cousins across the table at parents' nights. So I started off as a history teacher in John Bosco back in 1978. Was lucky enough to become principal teacher of history in John Bosco in 1981, and then moved on to schools like St Luke's High in Barrhead, John Ogilvie in Hamilton, before becoming head teacher in Turnbull High out in Bishopbriggs. And I've got to say, I loved each and every one of those schools. They were great schools. You met good colleagues, but you met fantastic young people as well, all from different backgrounds. But I enjoyed working at each and every single one of those schools, and I learned a lot in each and every one of the schools, and helped me to grow as a teacher and as a person in each and every one of those schools. So those were those were the things that I then retired in 2012.
And when you were teaching history, what parts of history did you like to teach the best?
Well, one of the curious things about a history teacher, you end up teaching things you've never actually studied either at school yourself or at university. So you go in and you suddenly discover as a new teacher that although you're qualified as a history teacher, you know absolutely nothing about all the subjects, the topics and courses you're having to teach. So there's a lot of work to catch up on in that. So I enjoyed, I suppose, a lot of kind of Scottish history, but I also enjoyed the way that we started to present history, getting the pupils to use primary sources. So, for instance, I was lucky enough to work with a person who worked in the Mitchell Library, who supported history teachers, and so when I was working the Gorbals, I got all the census data for the 1851, 61, 71, the census data for the Gorbals, and therefore you were able to. This was back when the computer system was BBC Masters was the high tech in those days, but you were able to teach children how to interrogate the census data and say, for instance, like how many people in the Gorbals in 1851 had been born in Ireland, or how many had been born in the Highlands, or what was the main job, because there was a lot of cotton factories in the Gorbals at that time. What were the age of people who worked in the cotton factories? There was a lot of child workers. So we were able to do things like that were real and relevant to the young people in that area. We also went out with trepidation to the southern necropolis, big graveyard in Caledonia Road, and went round the tombstones and looked at the types of jobs people had, the age and of people when they died. There was so much infant mortality, and that then allowed us to come back and find out what was the causes of like cholera and so on. We looked at the housing at the time. We used a lot of primary evidence and engaged young people with the actual sources. Looked at when the factories were being inspected. We used a lot of evidence from the Gorbals factories to find out what age children were, what jobs they did they get any schooling, was it very basic, whatever. So that type of thing I really enjoyed doing, not just the topic, but also the way we actually presented it to young people and got them to delve into the evidence themselves, and then to use that to write stories or essays about what life was like in the Gorbals.
Yeah, so rather than just a kind of static facts and figures history, trying to get it to unravel a wee bit and things like that. In recent times, obviously, with what's been going on in the world, there's some criticisms of how history is taught in schools in Britain, as to whether Britain's own history and a lot of the negative aspects of that should be taught more fully. What would you say your opinion is?
Yeah, I think there's got to be a balance here, and so we can't suddenly rewrite history. So we've got to present the evidence in all its fullness. So yeah, there's a strong history of Britain, but also the British Empire was there, and we've got to look what way did it benefit Britain, but how did it impact on the other parts of the world, but not to do that in a way that suddenly turns history in its head or whatever, but to look at a very balanced picture of what's happening, what happened in history in those days.
Yeah. And if we look at education nowadays, it's very different from maybe when you started out. What were some of your first impressions of getting into that environment when you started out as a teacher?
Yeah, well, first of all, I thought, I'm not cut out for this, right? Because it was, you were having to learn a lot of new parts of history that you'd never come across at school or university yourself. So it was a huge amount of work. You were also learning your trade as a teacher. And because you had big classes, in those days, if people weren't sitting O grades, there was no qualifications for them. So in some ways, you had to keep them motivated, because other than that, why were they still at school? Why would they still be forced to stay on at school? So you had to then develop your trade in terms of the methods you used to engage them, also in terms of behaviour control as well, to motivate them. So those were big challenges. It was exhausting your first year or so as a teacher. There were so many hours. Also remember never been catching so many illnesses in my life, because I suppose you go in and you're encountering hundreds of pupils in fairly contained spaces, and so anything that seemed to be going in your first year or two, you end up catching, and then thereafter you seem to be immune to everything for the rest of your teaching career. You were hardly ever off. But those first 2 years, I remember that thing, I'm off again, they'll think I'm at it. So those things, but it was, I remember just thinking every Friday night, I don't know if I'm cut out for this, but you just kept going, and eventually, the work paid off, and you developed the skills of class management and the methodology you used to make sure that the pupils were engaged. And you also, when I took over the department, looked at all the methods in the department to be sure that we boosted the exam passes, because it was important that young people from the Gorbals, but any school you're in, that they get the best start in life, and as many avenues after school were being open to them. So that was another big pressure to make sure you did your best by every child that came into your class.
So nowadays, and quite understandably, they talk about the strain and the pressures that teachers are under, and they are, and they also were when you started out as well. When you've got a situation like that, like when you're talking about on a Friday, sometimes you're feeling burnt out. Where do you draw your strength from to go back again?
I suppose you were brought up, and if you were getting paid a wage and you didn't go to your work, that was a form of stealing. So there was that kind of ethic that was bred into you in my own family, that that was your job. You were getting paid to do it, therefore you turn up as that. I suppose also, and this might sound bad, but you just prayed as well, to get the pray to the Holy Spirit to get you through it. And then at college, I met my future wife, Bernadette, and she was going through the same kind of thing, and we kind of supported each other and talked to each other through what was, she was in a different school, so rocks up in the Gargad, and we just talked to each other through it and helped each other, and then it just clicked.
Okay, you had a very storied kind of career in education. Is there anything that really stands out from your time as a teacher? Maybe a certain interaction with a pupil, a certain day, something like that? Is there anything, any standout memories?
Yeah, I suppose maybe standout days when you went in to look at the exam results and just been absolutely delighted that some people who were maybe touch and go had passed well, that you knew as a teacher of your own class, but as a head teacher looking at the overall results and seeing that the pupils had done really well in exams and therefore that offer they had got to get into university or whatever, they were now going to be able to do that. So I suppose that's maybe one aspect of it. There was, I suppose, when the schools are inspected and the HMI recognise the really good things about your school, about the whole school community and what the school is doing for young people and the engagement with families. Again, you take a sense of pride and satisfaction in that, but probably more meaningful is the fact that engagement with individual youngsters and maybe seeing children who maybe come from difficult backgrounds, fragmented backgrounds, and just seeing them grow and flourish as they get older in the school, and they leave as really kind of capable young men and women. So I suppose that there's the overall trends in the school, but looking at individual youngsters and seeing them, we were always very keen. We had a lot of youngsters who came to us in placing requests in East Lanarkshire from north of Glasgow, and from the day they came in, we worked hard to make sure that they were fully engaged in the life of the school, that they took part in extracurricular activities, whether it was football, Gaelic football, or the library, or chess, or whatever it was, but we hooked them in, and if they weren't getting involved in clubs, we contacted their parents and they said, look, there's all these things happening every lunchtime. We'll encourage them to take part, so they feel part of the school, they make friends out with their own classes, and it was good to see those events, those experiences help to give them confidence and feel part of the school as well. So those kind of individual moments.
And that's still very much a process that's ongoing, isn't it? Especially when you see a lot of people who've came here and they've fled really, really terrible situations in their own country, and they come into a Catholic school, and it's like it's important to give them that safe space,
yes.
you know. So it's something that's...
I think that is in relation to asylum seekers and people who are refugees and so on. It's important that they seek out the Catholic school, and other people who have come ahead of them from like Nigeria or wherever, encourage them to enrol in the Catholic school, even if they're not Catholic themselves. And it reminds me, we had a pupil who came to us in fifth year who had been at a non-denominational school, and she came to us in fifth and sixth year, and her mother had asked her, well, what's the difference between the two schools? And she told her mother that they really care about you in Turnbull, they really care about you in the Catholic school. And that was a delight to hear, and I think that's very true of almost every Catholic school up and down the country.
So you got the big gig here in Paisley Diocese as the Director of Education. How did that opportunity come about, and was that something you were kind of keen to pursue?
Well, so it came about because we had known Bishop John Keenan when he came to Christ the King as a newly ordained curate, and we'd kept in touch with him in his time in the parish, but also when he moved up to the chaplain at Glasgow University, would see him as we took pupils up and down to university to familiarise them. And then when he came bishop here as well. And it was socially one night with my wife there, and he was talking about the schools and about education and what he would like to achieve. And my wife said, well, why don't you ask him to help you? And I thought no more of it. I thought nothing would come of it until I got a phone call at 8 o'clock in the morning when I was a retired person still in my bed reading a book. And next thing, 2 weeks later, the bishop and the curate were over to speak to me about becoming part of the education team in Paisley Diocese. And I've got to say, I was quite enjoying my retired life, right? And I was trying to mention other people that could maybe do a better job. But eventually, right, how do you say no to the bishop, right? You don't. And I came in and was really lucky of the people I've had to work with, both the primary secretary advisor, but the 3 church reps. And that then kind of motivated me to get back into work mode and to do my very best for the bishop and for the Catholic schools in the diocese.
And I think everybody knows what a teacher does. Everybody's got a kind of working idea of what a head teacher does. But a director of education, tell us a wee bit about what the role entails and how do you measure success or achievement there?
Yeah. So I suppose the first thing the bishop asked us to do was to come up with a strategic plan for education in the diocese. And so I suppose at that point I went back on my time as a teacher and developing plans, and we came up with a plan that put the child at the centre and said, let's think about the children in our primary and secondary schools, right? Put them right at the centre of what we do. What do we have to do? Who do we have to engage with? Who do we have to support to give them the very best experience of being in a Catholic school, but also help them to achieve the goals of Catholic education, being the full promotion of the human person, and the way that the Charter for Catholic School is laid out, all that experience of prayer, of liturgy, of faith in action, giving them experiences to encounter Christ in their school. So what do we have to do to bring that about, to give the young people in the Diocese of Paisley the very best experience of being in a Catholic school? And so we developed a strategic plan that looked at supporting teachers, developing the teachers, developing the leadership of our schools, engaging parents, getting them engaging parents and helping them to nurture their children's faith, right? Not just talk at them, but engage with them, engage with local authorities. And I suppose that's another part of the job, is meeting with the rectors and heads of education and promoting the interests of Catholic schools. We also wanted to work with nationally there was a lot of church agencies that could help us, like Missio or Skiav, Aid to the Church in Need, and we wanted to engage with them and partner with them and use their expertise. And throughout that, we developed a strategic plan that encapsulated everybody involved, chaplains as well. Right? What could we do to support chaplains? Because some chaplains, particularly when it comes to secondary schools, but even primary schools, some priests, because most of our priests are now chaplains, right? Either to a primary or a secondary or both. And some priests are not entirely comfortable about getting into a class. So how do we support them? And how do we get the priests to share experience and their experiences and their expertise with each other? So that was what we did back in 2019, 2020. We came up with the first strategic plan. And since then, we've been really lucky because the team at the centre has worked well together, but much more importantly, the head teachers have welcomed us, have worked with us, have supported us, and the chaplains as well. And parents, we've set up a parent forum in the diocese, the first in Scotland, and we have tried to make that strategic plan a reality. And we've looked at, how do we improve the quality of religious education by providing resources? How do we develop their relationship with Christ by the experiences we give them, and how do we encourage them to put their faith in action, and again by encouraging them to support like Miss Mary's Meals, Scare, etc. So that's how do we measure success? So every year we ask schools to give us a report about what they've done about an aspect of their life at the school in relation to a document that SCES produced a number of years ago called Developing in Faith, which is linked very closely to the Scottish Government's How Good Is Our School? So this is almost how good is our Catholic school. And so we use that to benchmark what we're doing. So for instance, some of the things we've seen that we've been trying to do, so for instance in Primary 2, we did the travelling crib with all our Primary 2 families, and that was a massive success. And how do we know that? We know that because of the feedback we got at the parent forum, but we also got it from meetings of the RE coordinators and head teachers, and we got it through the Developing in Faith reports as well. So that's, I suppose, how we benchmark what have. So there's one thing of doing something, but you could be doing things and nothing happens, there's no impact. And what we want to do is to do things that will have an impact, that will help teachers, make it easy for them to be Catholic teachers, right, and give them the tools, the resources to do that. So we've done things like that, the travelling crib in Primary 2, the travelling rosary in Primary 4, the First Communion year, and then high school we had the Eucharistic Miracles exhibition linked to Blessed Carlo, soon to be Saint Carlo Acutis. We had a lady come up from Sheffield to go around the 8 clusters and shared the life, the example of Carlo Acutis, but also the stories of the Eucharistic miracle. And as a result of that, we've seen the growth of post-COVID, of reintroduction of Eucharistic adoration and so on. So again, we've been able to look at what we've been doing and then to see the fruits of that coming through in the report, the Developing Faith reports coming through to us in schools.
Yeah, so it seems really, really fulsome, like your job and the department's work and stuff like that within the diocese. You mentioned there as well Bishop Keenan, and obviously someone you've known for quite a while. What's it? What was it? It's different, obviously, when someone's your parish priest. What's it been like to work with him, and have you learned any kind of helpful things from him?
So it's been a joy to work with Bishop John, and I can't think of any other bishop, well, and maybe one or two now, that would have been as supportive of the education department and the schools. He is so committed to the primary and secondary schools, the young children, young people in their schools, and he visits every school and things like that. But whatever we wanted to do, he would say yes and give us the finance to make that happen. And I suppose some of the things we've learned from him is never to close things down, never to say, oh no, that'll never work. Right? So yeah, you bring your professional knowledge and experience to bring a sense of reality, but I suppose he's always so open to everyone and all church agencies and individuals that there are one or two things we might have thought, oh, that'll not work. But we thought, do you know what, the bishop would probably say yes to this. So let's give it a go. And as a result of that, there have been really great things that have happened in our schools and for the young people. So I suppose the big thing we've learned from Bishop John is not to say no and not to close things down before you've really thought about it, not to have a knee-jerk reaction to say, oh, that'll never work. Because he is so positive and he is so open and so supportive that he has made things happen in Paisley Diocese that couldn't have happened without him.
Mm. So you mentioned 3 things there, positivity, support, openness. Obviously very, very important qualities, characteristics. What do you think are the most important qualities or characteristics that someone working as a teacher or in the field of education should possess? Are those three part of it?
Yeah, probably. I think first of all, to be a teacher, you've got to like children, right? And you've got to be interested in children. You want to do the best for them. So you want. I've come across in my nearly 40 years of teaching, you do come across the odd person who's in the teaching profession. You think, why are you a teacher? Right? Why are you a teacher? So you've got, that's the first thing. And when we do courses for the newly qualified teachers, the probationary teachers, that's one of the things we reinforce to them, that it's not just about the curriculum, and it's not about your subject for a secondary school. It's about the children in your class. And if you're in teaching for 40 years, think of the hundreds, maybe thousands of children that will come through your classroom, and you will never know how you will touch their lives, and hopefully you will touch their lives for the good, and you'll make a difference to them. So I think that's the first thing. You've got to like children. And I suppose then the other thing is this: as a Catholic teacher, your faith should be alive, right? And I think a lot of young people come into the teaching profession maybe have strayed away from their faith, the practice of their faith. And one of the things we encourage them to do is to get back in touch with their faith. And we hope, therefore, when they come into a Catholic school and they see the life of the Catholic school in terms of Advent and Lent and Easter, and also those big milestones of the sacraments, we hope that that experience of being Catholic in a school will touch them and bring them back and want them to share their life of faith. So I suppose, yeah, they've got to be, they've got to like children. Hopefully they want to provide a good Catholic religious experience for the children, their care throughout their years. And they've got to be dedicated. They've got to be a dedicated professional who will do the very best, the way they teach, the way they present the curriculum, their subjects, that enables young people to get the experiences out of class through extracurricular activities, but also through the curriculum and through the exam diet, that will give them the passports to adult life, that will help enable them to have a good career, but also that we've given them the experiences that will help them to be a good person in life.
Excellent. Now, to get down to the nitty-gritty here, what are the positives and negatives about working in education? And, be as open and frank as you want.
I suppose starting with the negatives is, and I think this has increased even since I retired, is the enormous workload and the danger, and in particular for head teachers, the amount of things that are piled onto head teachers from local authorities and the government is really stressful, and we see that in the number of head teachers who retire early. They've just had enough. So that's a huge negativity, and again, every ill that society seems to have it is passed on to the schools. The schools need to do something about this. So whether it's obesity, whether it's drugs, or whatever now, right? Suddenly it becomes the responsibility of the schools. You need to do this, but nothing's ever taken away. Everything is added on. So I suppose those are the big negatives. And I suppose the positives are that you look at the difference you make, or hopefully will make, to the lives of young people, and see them flourish and grow, develop into confident and caring, committed young people. And I suppose that's the big joy, the big positive, is the difference you can make to young people.
To go back to what you were saying there about the negative, if you're a magic wand, how would you change that workload? Would it be more teachers? Would it be smaller class sizes? There's lots of different things that do get bandied about as what can fix it. What's your opinion on that?
I suppose Probably more teachers. That's a big expense. I would look at the leadership teams in schools and make sure, because in some of our primary schools in particular, there's a head teacher, there's no deputy, and then you've got a principal teacher, right? And the principal teacher ends up doing the work of the deputy, right? But at a principal teacher's salary. So I would make sure, but if a small school's only got a head teacher, the local authority, the Scottish Government, doesn't come along to them and say, well, it's only you, therefore you don't need to do X, Y, and Z. So there's the same expectations on a small school as there is with a larger school with whatever number of deputy heads and promoted staff. So I think because there is this worrying trend of head teachers burning out and retiring early, the government and local authorities really need to look at making sure that what they're expecting of our school leaders, that they are resourcing them and giving them the support for them to be able to deliver that for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. There are a lot of Catholic education's got a lot of detractors. For some, they don't have its best interests at heart. So
No, indeed.
We know why for certain reasons.
Mm.
However, if you were to kind of sell it, why would you think it's important for people to support Catholic education?
I think it's important because, particularly if our parents don't support Catholic schools, then we'll lose our Catholic schools. Right? No government is going to have the bottle to say in its manifesto that in the next Parliament we are going to abolish Catholic schools. Yes, we've got some the humanists and Green parties and people like that would do that. But the main parties are going to be averse to that kind of risk. So we need to make sure that the Catholic parents still see the Catholic schools as giving their children, the best possible experiences. And if we look at the evidence, we see that in terms of Catholic schools, in terms of their HMIE reports, we see that Catholic schools do really, really well. In terms of exam results, when Catholic schools are compared to similar socioeconomic schools, Catholic schools outperform that. And so therefore, but as well as those kind of outward kind of validations of Catholic schools, we need Catholic schools also to be shown that when young people themselves leave, that they feel that they've had a good deal, that they've been supported, they've been nurtured, they've been given the very best experience. And that way, it's very important that a Catholic school is Catholic, right? We don't say we're a Catholic school and we have the occasional mass, but we need to ensure that the Catholic school is Catholic, the values of the gospel permeate the whole life of the school, that the Catholic school isn't a place where gospel values are simply taught, but gospel values are actually lived out in the lives of the staff and lived out in the experience of the children and young people. There cannot be a disconnect. And I suppose one of the examples I've got is the fact that when we were inspected as a school in 2010, one of the chief inspectors led the team, but she had her PA with her who was a university graduate, and she lived in Edinburgh. And at the end of her time in Turnbull, she said that she was going to choose a Catholic school for her children, even though she wasn't a Catholic, because what she had seen in the Catholic school, she wanted for her children. And I think we've got to have a selling point to the outward face of society to show that we are doing well in terms of HMI and doing well in terms of exam results, but we've also got to make sure that the parents, families and young people themselves feel that they've been supported and nurtured throughout their time in the Catholic school.
To play devil's advocate a wee bit there, it's obviously a massive bonus that people want to send their kids to Catholic schools. It says something really good about the Catholic school itself. However, if the kid per se isn't Catholic, and then there's quite a lot of kids in the class, say, that aren't Catholic, how do you deal with the challenge of, kind of maintaining the Catholicity when you're educating kids who maybe their parents have sent them there because it's got a good reputation rather than the faith ethos of that?
Absolutely. So I think that's where, when at the induction process, right, when parents are coming along to either P1 or S1 induction meetings, that the head teacher is very explicit about what the life of a Catholic school is. It's not just an ordinary school with a bit of RE thrown in, but it shares with the parents what the life of the Catholic school is in terms of the prayer and the liturgy and Mass and so on, in terms of the values that we expect young people to share with us in terms of the gospel of kindness and respect and dignity and so on. And to say to parents, right, this is what it's about. If you're not happy with that, right, maybe this isn't the place for you. Right? So I think we've got to be open what this is about. Now, in the classroom situation, where in a class, if you've got a number of children who have come from a non-Catholic background, but let's be honest, there's a number of children who are Catholic, but they and their families don't darken the door of the church between First Communion and whatever, right? And that's where we've got to provide rich experiences for them, right? And in terms of retreats and things like that, to give them significant quality opportunities to experience Christ and the forgiveness, the mercy, the hope, the love of Christ. And in the same way, a teacher would plan quality learning experiences for maths or language or whatever. The school has got to plan and deliver quality faith experiences for children and hook them in. And we know that young people who don't come from a faith background or who have come from a lapsed background can be encouraged to kind of get to live out their faith or become and to be respectful. I think what we need to make sure is that every young person, whether they're practicing Catholics or not, are respectful of the Catholic life of the school, and that that's very much part of the deal. That okay, we maybe not, if you're not a Catholic, we might not force you to go to Mass in the church. Right? We would encourage that, and vast majority of children do that. There's very, very few people that will opt out. So we've got to give them those experiences and make sure they're quality experiences that touch them in some way.
Actually, just following on a wee bit from that, one thing I've noticed is that kids whose parents do have a faith, and that faith is Islam, they seem to prefer to send their kids to a Catholic school than not. Why do you think that is?
I think because I think they realise that faith would be an important aspect of life of the Catholic school, and it might not be the Islamic faith, but it would be the importance of developing a relationship with God. I think also the Islamic community would be very wary of the kind of sex education and equalities and inclusion approaches that would be in the non-Catholic school. And I think that they would feel much safer with the Catholic approach to relationships education through call to love and God's loving plan. They would also be happier with a Catholic school's approach to equalities and inclusion. And I think so. Those I think would be the two triggers for Muslim parents to support Catholic schools.
Yeah. Okay, I'll take you into my dimension, my environment now, and I'll ask you, what does the term mission mean to you?
I suppose mission, when I was at school, every week you brought in a penny, an old penny, for the missions. So I suppose mission has been part of me, as well as mission appeals and so on. And you think back to our Lord sending out the 72 and things like that. So I suppose mission, in some ways, you think of heroic men and women who give up their lives to work in mission territories in South America and Africa and Asia, and you think of the massive things that they do with their lives and the differences they make in their communities. materially, maybe in terms of education and hospitals and infrastructure like that, but also bringing the really good news of what it means to be a Christian, a Catholic, that no other NGO is ever going to do. Right, so NGOs will maybe, provide support or responses to emergencies and so on, but no other NGO is going to spread the good news of Christ, allow them to experience the life of the church. So I suppose that's mission, and I suppose in terms of, as a parishioner, supporting the mission appeal in October for Missio, but also the other appeal for an order, a religious order will come around and make a mission appeal. I suppose that's in terms of mission. As a teacher, I suppose it's also that you're looking in ways in which engagement with Missio and the resources, the quality resources that Missio provides can make a difference in terms of the experience of the children and young people in their classrooms, in terms of getting to know these heroic people throughout the years of centuries of the church, as well as currently, that do such excellent work in developing countries. And I suppose as a person, you're thinking, I'm not going to go out to Africa or whatever, but I suppose I've got a responsibility in terms of sharing my faith. Maybe not going to, a soap box at Hyde Park Corner, but I suppose in making sure, in developing the faith of my own children and grandchildren. As a grandparent, you're still encouraging, working with your grandchildren and at Christmas time or Easter time and stuff like that, and sharing and welcome to Mass on a Sunday. But I suppose also that as a Catholic, a mission is, I suppose, the way you live your life. And, there shouldn't be a disconnect between going to Mass on a Sunday and the rest of your life that week. And I suppose people who are not Catholic shouldn't look at us and think, oh, they go to Mass, but they're just as bad as us. They should look at Catholics and think, there's something, they've got something going here, because the way they speak to people, the way they treat people, the way they help people, there is something about being a Catholic, and that kind of ordinary, not flashy, not preachy way of living your life as best you can in terms of the values of the gospel and the Christian message. I suppose in my experience that's mission for me.
And if we look at our schools again, sort of thing, and how kids can be missionaries, what's the best way that kids and teachers can live out their mission in the Catholic schools?
So I suppose it's how they live their life within the school in terms of the relationships, the values, etc. But also looking at how they reach out to help other people, and how they reach out in terms of maybe in local nursing homes or the homeless or food banks and stuff like that, in terms of that kind of showing compassion for other people, but obviously directly in terms of being missionaries, as go and teach all nations type of missionaries. Then I suppose it is really important that they create space for the work of Missio, the resources of Missio, the visits from Missio, to enhance what the experience of children and young people, and make them aware of what real life missionaries are doing here and now, or what missionary saints have done in the past, and how, as they go through, for instance, like confirmation years, and become aware of the fruits of the Holy Spirit, the gifts of the Holy Spirit, to look at missionaries and look at how they are real life examples of how they are living out those gifts and how they are displaying those fruits of the Holy Spirit. So I think that I don't think we should see Missio, right, we're doing Mass and we've got RE, but alright, we've got Missio now, we better throw that in. It should be, and there should be a kind of a total link between their experience in the school, their experience in RE, preparation for the sacrament, and the resources, the work of Missio.
You mentioned there about missionary experience, and obviously, prior to COVID, we had a programme up and running with the secondary schools where we would take some of the kids on mission with us to different places and see the kind of projects that have been, the type of projects that have been supported. And like you say, that gives that example of witness. Is that something you've ever been fortunate enough to do, is to go on a mission trip?
No, not personally. And I don't think I'd have ever been as brave to have done that. But I know that one or two schools have got links with areas of the developing world. So in Turnbull, there was a link with the sisters of the Franciscan Sisters of Immaculate Conception, and they had a project in Kenya, Living with Hope, which we supported as a school, and sisters would come and contribute to the curriculum and so on. So I suppose that was, and some of our senior pupils, after they'd finished 6th year, but before they would start university, took a gap year out, and they went to live and work with the Franciscans in Kenya. Also know that in St Benedict's in Linwood, they have a very strong link with St Patrick's School in Africa, and they do kind of their pupils will go and work in the area, but they will also welcome the pupils from St Patrick's back to Linwood, and that kind of partnership working is going on. So there are wee bits of it there. I mean, it would be good, I think, if Missio did reintroduce that as an opportunity. Obviously, there's all the risk assessments and health and safety and all the rest of it, safeguarding issues to be considered. But I think it would give a really high quality experience to young people to say, right, maybe before you go to, or maybe after you finish university, have you thought of this type of experience? And as long as they know that they're going there, not just to be, that they're doing all the good work, that they're going to go and they're going to learn from the people that they meet and the way they live their life, and the value that they have and how they live their Catholic faith. That in terms of going out to these countries, our young people will contribute, but they will also learn as a result of my experience.
Well, we're always looking for, newly retired volunteers, so I'll maybe come back to you on that. You spoke about the importance of the kids in Catholic schools getting to know who Missio Scotland is, or what we do, and things like that. But why is it important for Catholic schools to support the work directly of Missio Scotland and our partners in the Pontifical Mission Society?
Yeah, I suppose because the Bishops' Council of Scotland have identified Missio over all these years as their charity for Catholic primary schools. So I suppose it's that incentive. But also I think it's important that children know that they are part of, not just part of their parish or their diocese with the bishop, but they're part of a worldwide church, and that their brothers and sisters out in these other territories are doing really good work, and that they can support that, they can be part of that, and that they, by their small efforts, can make a difference to support the missionaries and also the people that they are serving and spreading the good news. And I suppose, yes, so there's fundraising for Missio, there's the participation in the 5-star Missio schools that we would encourage. There's using the Missio resources as part of the learning experiences, but also I suppose it's the prayer for missionaries to encourage our schools to, not just through Mission Month, but maybe other times of the year as well, to encourage children, young people to pray for our missionaries and the work that they're doing across the world.
And you mentioned as well that the missionaries themselves and the kids getting to know them. Do you think it's important to kind of highlight the work of missionaries themselves within Catholic education?
I think it makes it concrete, doesn't it, as well? It's not just something that's happening 1,000 miles away it makes it real for them to encounter a person that is or has spending significant parts of their life out in these areas, living fairly rough and ready existences, but doing tremendous work and making such a difference to the families, the areas, the communities that they serve. So I think that it takes it from something that you read about or you watch a video about, and you actually encounter someone who makes that concrete.
Yeah. To take it back to the specificity of Catholic education, what would be your hopes for it in the future as someone who's had so much experience in it and has contributed so much to Catholic education? What would be your hopes for its future?
I just hope that Catholic schools continue to be well regarded by Her Majesty's inspectors, that they continue to deliver high quality exam results. I hope that we can also make the three-legged stool of homeschooling parish a reality. That whole team around the child, to use a secular expression, a common expression of the team around the child. In terms of the church, the team around the child is their family, their parish and their school. And to make that a reality, because at the moment, some parts of that three-legged stool are broken. It could be the family that go to Mass. It could be the parish that doesn't really engage fully with the life of the school. And by and large, I think the strongest of those three legs tends to be the Catholic school. But I think what we would want to do is go back to our strategic plan, to look at all the people involved in forming the child, the young person. We want to make sure that partnership of homeschool and parish becomes even stronger, and therefore that people see the value of Catholic education. People want their child to go to Catholic school, and because they know that they're going to get a really good deal in the Catholic school, not just in terms of exam results, but in terms of the person they're going to be at S1 induction evenings. I also say to parents, what do you want for your child when they leave the school in 6 years? And not just what do you want in terms of 5 A's, or what do you want in terms of what university place or college place or job they can get, but what type of person do you want your child to be in 6 years' time? Right? What type of values do you want them to have? The person, that's not just interested in themselves, interested in a big fancy house and a big flash car, but do you want your son or daughter to be someone that is kind and compassionate and treats other people with respect, who reaches out to other people, who does their best for other people? So what do you want for your child in 6 years' time? And so I think that's where we need to kind of focus our work with parents, but also and say to parishes and schools, well, how can you make that a reality? So I think those are my dreams for Catholic school, that they continue to thrive, not just to exist, but to thrive, to deliver high quality experiences to the children and young people in our care.
Neil, you've been absolutely fantastic and really, really generous with your time on your last day as well. But we usually end on a wee light-hearted note by asking our interviewees to tell us something about themselves that people might not know. Away from the classroom, do you have like a special skill, a particular hobby? Is there something that you're interested in that they might not know about?
No, I'm a totally boring person in that regard. So, I think that my interests are football, are reading. Favourite place in the world is Lake Garda, holiday there with my wife Bernadette. I suppose one of the big preoccupations now, and it will be increasingly so when I retire, is with the 12 grandchildren, and helping to look after them and encourage them, and enjoy them as well. So yeah. I suppose that's going to be my big hobby, please God, for the next few years.
You'll be getting sent to Smith's for the Christmas presents then. Neil, thanks very much for taking time to speak to us. That's magic.
Thank you, Jim.
God bless. Thanks. Missio Scotland is the Scottish branch of the Pontifical Mission Societies, the Pope's official charity for overseas mission. To learn more about the work of Missio Scotland, you can visit our website www.missioscotland.com. You can like us on Facebook, www.facebook.com/Missio Scotland. You can also follow us on Twitter, Missio_Scotland, and on Instagram, Missio Scotland. If you would like to donate to Missio Scotland, visit www.missioscotland.com/donate. You can also call us on 01236 449 774 or send donations to Missio Scotland, 4 Laird Street, Coatbridge, ML5 3LJ. Please keep us in your prayers. Thank you and God bless.